The heart races, hands tremble, and in her eyes reflects the fear of the unknown. But when he whispers, "I'll go slowly," a universe of love begins to bloom like jasmine at dawn. Have you ever felt that shiver of unexpected love? From which romantic corner of the world are you watching us today? Leave us a like and subscribe to immerse yourself in this story, where tenderness conquers even the most fearful heart. In the twilight of the jasmine-scented bedroom that she herself had picked that morning, Emily's hands trembled as she adjusted her wedding dress one last time. White flower petals scattered across the marriage bed looked like small islands of purity, floating in an ocean of uncertainty. The marriage had been arranged by both families, as was tradition in their small town in rural Georgia, but nothing had prepared her for this moment of intimacy with a man she barely knew. The deepest hearts often hide behind the longest silences, her grandmother had told her before the wedding, words that now echoed in her mind like a distant memory. The creaking of the door announced his arrival. Andrew entered with measured steps, as formal in his dark suit as he had been during the ceremony. His eyes, however, revealed a mixture of nervousness and consideration that Emily hadn't expected. As he approached, she anticipated haste, anxiety, perhaps even roughness, as her married friends had whispered in secret. But his gentle words, spoken in a deep, warm voice, surprised her. "I'll take it slow," he murmured, stopping a step away, respecting the invisible space she had created with her tension. "We have a lifetime to get to know each other." That simple phrase resonated in the room like a promise that would forever change her understanding of love. Emily raised her eyes, meeting a gaze that seemed to contain more stories than she had imagined. The grandfather clock in the hallway marked the hours with a solemn cadence, while the silver moonlight filtered through the lace curtains, casting shadows that danced on the walls like silent witnesses to their first true encounter. That night, he simply sat on the edge of the bed and asked her to tell him about her childhood dreams. And she, surprised by the request, began to unravel the threads of her personal history, with hesitant words that gradually became firmer, discovering that some invisible chains were beginning to loosen within her chest. Emily had always been known in town for her quiet determination, her expressive eyes that spoke more than her words, and her ability to find beauty in the simplest things, characteristics that made her unique among the young women of the region. Her internal conflict lay in her resistance against the expectations imposed by the conservative local society, where a wife's role was rigidly defined. She secretly dreamed of having her own choices, of deep conversations, and of companionship that went beyond marital obligations. Oakwood Manor stood majestically among cotton fields and peach orchards, with its white columns and red brick facade that had witnessed generations of the Harrison family. Now, as the new lady of the house, Emily found herself navigating a sea of traditions and expectations that threatened to drown her true essence. "You should consider yourself fortunate," Martha, her mother-in-law, told her while showing her closets full of fine linens. "Andrew could have married any of the Thompson girls, who have more land and connections in Atlanta, but he was always stubborn with his choices." The words hit Emily like small, sharp stones. Had she truly been his choice, or merely an obligation accepted with resignation? During family meals, she observed her husband interact with his brothers and cousins, so different from the considerate man who appeared in the privacy of their bedroom. One afternoon, while organizing her new dressing table, she found a forgotten book in one of the drawers. Upon opening it, she discovered it was a journal with meticulous handwriting recording observations about the stars. The last entry dated from just a week before the wedding. "Andromeda constellation visible tonight. Perfect clarity, like her eyes when she smiles without realizing it." Emily closed the book with her heart racing, wondering if those words might refer to her. The public Andrew, serious and pragmatic, was beginning to show cracks that revealed something much deeper. That night, when he returned from supervising the fields, Emily ventured to ask, "Are you interested in astronomy?" The surprise on his face quickly gave way to a cautious expression. "Have you been looking through my things?" he asked, in a tone that wasn't accusatory but rather vulnerable. "I found a journal by accident," she admitted. "I didn't know you observed the stars." Andrew remained silent for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "There are many things you don't know about me," he finally responded, his voice softening. "And I suppose that's fair, considering how our families brought us together." That night, he led her to the roof of the house. They had placed a blanket and a small telescope that she had never seen before. "This was my refuge," he confessed. "When the weight of being the Harrison firstborn became too heavy, I came up here." The stars have a way of putting everything in perspective. Under the starry canopy, Emily began to glimpse the man behind the facade of the respectable plantation owner, and something within her trembled with a mixture of curiosity and hope. The routine of the estate began to establish itself like the roots of the oak trees that gave the manor its name, deep and firm. Emily learned to navigate between the expectations of her new family and the small moments of connection with Andrew, which appeared like unexpected lightning in an apparently clear sky. During the mornings, the house buzzed with activity. Workers came and went, the cooks prepared food for everyone, and Martha supervised every detail with a critical eye. Emily tried to find her place in that well-oiled machinery that had functioned long before her arrival. "The lady must always maintain dignity," her mother-in-law constantly reminded her. "The workers respect strength, not excessive familiarity." However, on a rainy morning, Emily found herself taking shelter in the kitchen where old cook Ruth was preparing breakfast. The woman with knotty hands and a warm smile invited her to sit. "You're not like the other ladies who've passed through this house," Ruth commented while kneading bread. "You have light in your eyes like he did when he was a boy." "Andrew? What was he like as a child?" asked Emily, hungry for any information about the man with whom she shared her life. Ruth smiled, revealing a gold tooth that gleamed between her cracked lips. "A dreamer, always with his head in the clouds and his hands in the soil. Mr. Robert, may he rest in peace, tried to make him more practical, tougher. But there are natures that can't be changed, only hidden." That conversation opened a window into Andrew's past. Emily began to observe him with new eyes, the way he stopped to listen to the older workers, how he caressed the horses while speaking to them in a low voice, the gentleness with which he treated the children of the field hands. One afternoon, while walking along the property's boundaries, Emily came across a small structure hidden among leafy trees. Upon approaching, she discovered it was an improvised studio. Through the window, she saw Andrew bent over a table, completely absorbed. His hands, which she had seen firmly holding the reins of horses, now moved with delicacy over what appeared to be a canvas. Fascinated, she observed how her husband, the pragmatic plantation owner who discussed prices and harvests with relentless firmness, painted with the sensitivity of an artist. The vibrant colors captured the essence of the Georgian countryside at sunset, with its mountains wrapped in golden mist. The crunch of a branch under her feet alerted Andrew. When their gazes met through the glass, Emily saw something she had never witnessed in his eyes: fear. Not physical fear, but the vulnerable panic of someone who has been discovered in their most intimate truth. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Andrew exited the studio, closing the door behind him with a protective movement. "Nobody comes around here," he said, his voice tense. "It's my personal place." "What you were painting is beautiful," Emily dared to say. "I didn't know you were an artist." A bitter laugh escaped his lips. My father would have laughed at that word. "Harrison men don't waste time with paintbrushes when there's land to manage," he used to say. Andrew looked toward the main house, visible in the distance. "There are expectations, Emily. There always have been." "I know expectations well," she responded softly. "But perhaps they don't have to be chains." Something changed in his gaze, as if a slightly open door allowed a glimpse of a luminous room. "Would you like to see the rest?" he asked, gesturing toward the studio. Emily nodded, and when she entered that sacred space, she knew she was crossing a much more significant threshold than that of the small building. She was being invited into Andrew Harrison's true inner world. The revelation of the painting studio had subtly altered the balance between them. Like tectonic plates imperceptibly shifting beneath the surface, something fundamental was changing in the structure of their marriage. Each glance now carried the weight of a shared secret. Each silence was charged with possibilities. Emily discovered that Andrew had been painting since childhood, secretly taught by a former tutor who visited the plantation. His paintings, hidden in that refuge, captured not just landscapes but emotions. The melancholy of rainy afternoons, the hope of dawns over the cotton fields, the solitude of mountains wrapped in mist. "My father considered art a weakness," he explained one afternoon while showing her his works. "Harrison men build, produce, conquer. They don't dream. "But you dreamed," Emily affirmed, not as a question, but as an acknowledgement. Andrew nodded, his fingers brushing a canvas that showed the profile of a woman looking toward a distant horizon. Emily noticed with surprise that the face, though partially visible, had an unsettling resemblance to her own. "I've always dreamed," he admitted, "even when I learned to hide it so well that sometimes I forgot my own dreams." Life on the plantation continued its inexorable rhythm, the harvests, the social visits, Martha's expectations about how a Harrison wife should behave. But now there existed a parallel world that only Emily and Andrew shared, made of whispered conversations under the stars and secret afternoons in the studio amid the scent of turpentine and oil paint. One morning, while they were having breakfast in the main dining room, under the watchful eye of the late patriarch's portrait, Martha casually dropped some news. "The Thompsons will visit us this Sunday. They're bringing their daughter Catherine. It was a shame she couldn't attend the wedding. She was in Europe perfecting her French and piano." Emily noticed how Andrew's knuckles turned white around his coffee cup. "Mother, I don't think it's necessary." "It's absolutely necessary," Martha interrupted. "The Thompsons are our most important allies in the region. Besides, Catherine has always been very close to our family." The look that the woman gave her son contained a message that Emily couldn't decipher, but which seemed to hit Andrew like an invisible whip. That night, as they prepared for bed, Emily gathered the courage to ask, "Who is Catherine Thompson?" The silence that followed weighed more than any immediate answer. Andrew, sitting on the edge of the bed, kept his gaze fixed on his hands. "Catherine was my mother's choice," he finally responded. "The perfect candidate to continue the Harrison legacy. Educated in the best European schools from an influential family. Our families have been allied for generations." "Did you love her?" The question escaped Emily's lips before she could contain it. Andrew raised his eyes, and his gaze reflected a complexity that she was only beginning to understand. "I've known her since childhood. Everyone assumed we would marry someday," he paused. "But no, Emily, I didn't love her. I admired her intelligence, her social grace. But she never saw beyond the Harrison heir. She never asked about the man behind the name." His words hung between them, charged with implications that neither dared to fully articulate. Had Andrew chosen to break with expectations, or had it simply been a coincidence of circumstances that had united them? The Thompsons' visit arrived with the inevitable precision of a well-calibrated clock. Catherine proved to be everything Emily had imagined and feared. Elegant, sophisticated, with a classic beauty that made any other type of beauty seem provincial. Her exquisite manners barely concealed the constant evaluation to which she subjected Emily, measuring the new Mrs. Harrison against an invisible but relentless standard. During lunch, conversations flowed like a controlled river, where each word seemed to have a strategic purpose. Emily observed the ease with which Catherine navigated these social waters, while she felt like an inexperienced swimmer struggling against the current. "Andrew always had an exceptional eye for beauty," Catherine commented, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "His choices have always been interesting." "My husband has many facets that few know," Emily responded, holding her gaze. "It's a privilege to discover them day by day." A spark of recognition flashed in Catherine's eyes, as if she had just identified a more formidable adversary than she had anticipated. Under the table, Emily felt Andrew's hand seeking hers, a gesture of solidarity that sealed something important between them. That night, while fireflies dotted the dark garden with light, Andrew took her to the roof again. But this time, instead of the telescope, he had arranged a small, intimate dinner. "I wanted to thank you," he said, pouring wine into 2 glasses, "for today, for understanding without my having to explain." "What really happened between you and Catherine?" asked Emily, feeling it was time for complete truths. Andrew contemplated the ruby liquid in his glass, as if he could find the right words there. "Our engagement was practically agreed upon when she left for Europe. During her absence, I began to see her as the symbol of a life traced by others, not by me." His gaze rose toward the stars. "And then I saw you, in the town market, haggling so passionately for some flower seeds that it seemed your life depended on them. You had dirt on your hands and a determination in your eyes that made me wonder what it would feel like to be looked at like that, with such intensity." Emily remembered that day. She hadn't even noticed the Harrison son observing her, as she argued over the price of some jasmine seeds she wanted to plant in the yard of her family home. So, it wasn't a casual arrangement between our families. Andrew's smile had a hint of mischief that she rarely saw. Let's say I suggested the idea to my father in a way that made him believe it was his. Your family had a respectable name, though not as much fortune as the Thompsons. It was a reasonable alliance, though not the most advantageous, acceptable enough not to raise too many objections. The revelation fell upon Emily like warm rain, unexpected but welcome. The marriage she had accepted as an imposed duty was beginning to reveal itself as something much more complex, woven with threads of intention and choice that she hadn't perceived. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Because I wanted you to know me first," he responded, his eyes reflecting the starlight. Not the heir who manipulated circumstances to get what he wanted, but the man who is learning, day by day, to be worthy of the woman who haggled for jasmine seeds as if her soul depended on it. As autumn approached, covering the hills with a blanket of golden and crimson leaves, Emily discovered that her marriage was like unknown terrain that revealed itself step by step. Each conversation with Andrew, each shared silence, each glance exchanged under Martha's arched eyebrows built an increasingly detailed map of her new reality. The revelation about the true circumstances of their marriage had planted a seed of hope in Emily's heart. However, she soon discovered that secrets at Oakwood Manor grew like grass after rain, abundant and persistent. One Sunday morning, as the family prepared to attend service at the town church, Emily noticed that Andrew excused himself with a casual mention of checking on a matter with workers in the north section of the plantation. Martha simply nodded, without the questioning that normally accompanied any deviation from family traditions. Driven by a curiosity that grew with each new facet discovered of her husband, Emily decided to follow him discreetly. She watched him mount his horse and head not toward the cotton fields, but toward a less traveled path that wound between dense magnolia trees. Gathering her skirt, Emily followed the path on foot, maintaining a prudent distance. After nearly half an hour, the path led to a clearing where a small wooden cabin stood, modest but well maintained. From her hiding place among the vegetation, she saw Andrew dismount and be greeted by an older woman who came out leaning on a carved walking stick. The embrace they shared radiated a familiarity that surprised Emily. The woman, with white hair gathered in a simple bun and skin weathered by the sun, was not a simple worker on the plantation. The tenderness with which Andrew treated her spoke of a much deeper bond. Emily remained hidden, observing as her husband and the old woman entered the cabin. 15 minutes later, she couldn't resist the temptation to approach. The voices that reached her through the open window stopped her a few steps from the entrance. "You've been later than usual, my boy." The woman's voice was melodious despite her age. "Is it because of her? Because of your wife?" "Emily is adapting well, Mama Dorothy." Andrew's response froze Emily in place. "She's stronger than she appears." "Have you told her about me?" asked the woman. A silence preceded Andrew's answer. "Not yet. There are complexities. My mother still—" "Your mother will never accept that her late husband had a life before he met her," the old woman interrupted with a soft laugh but without bitterness. "'Tis not your responsibility to carry Robert's secrets, my boy. You're my family, Mama Dorothy." Andrew's voice acquired a firmness that Emily recognized from his most decisive moments. "You always have been, ever since you picked me up from my falls when I was learning to walk, long before any governess hired by my mother. And you are the spitting image of your father at your age," nostalgia tinged the woman's words. "With the same heart divided between duty and dreams, but you have something he lacked, the courage to choose your own path." Emily retreated slowly, her mind processing the revelation. Mama Dorothy must be Andrew's former nanny, perhaps something more in the life of the late Mr. Robert. A family secret kept at a safe distance from the main house and from Martha's inquisitive eyes. She returned to the plantation by an alternative route, arriving just in time to join the family carriage departing for church. During the entire service, seated next to her mother-in-law who followed the rituals with rigorous devotion, Emily couldn't help but observe the faces of the parishioners, wondering how many other secrets and hidden truths might exist behind the respectable facades of the county's families. When Andrew rejoined them for the Sunday lunch, he brought with him a bouquet of wildflowers, gathered during the rounds. Their eyes met briefly, and she perceived a flash of unease, as if he feared his absence might have aroused suspicions. That night, as they prepared for bed, Emily finally spoke. "The flowers you brought today, they're the same ones that grow near Mama Dorothy's house, aren't they?" The brush with which Andrew was combing his hair stopped midway. Through the mirror, his eyes found Emily's with a mixture of surprise and resignation. "You followed me." It wasn't a question or an accusation, simply a statement. "I wanted to know all parts of your life," she responded with simplicity. "Even those you keep hidden." Andrew turned to look at her directly, evaluating something in her expression. "What did you hear?" "Enough to understand that Mama Dorothy is important to you, and that her existence is one of the many secrets of this house." A deep sigh escaped Andrew's lips as he sat beside her on the bed. "Dorothy Jenkins was the nanny who raised me. My mother has always been distant in maternal matters. She preferred the company of Atlanta society to that of a restless boy." He paused. "But there's more. Mama Dorothy was my father's first love, before family ambition pushed him toward a more convenient marriage with my mother's family. She was the daughter of plantation workers without land or name." "Does your mother know?" asked Emily, though the answer seemed evident. "She suspects, as do all those who choose not to see the obvious," Andrew replied. "My father built that cabin for Mama Dorothy when she returned to the county after years of absence. He installed her there as a loyal former employee, an explanation that no one openly questioned. I discovered the truth when I was 12, overhearing a conversation between them." Emily processed the information, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. "That's why you understand so well the weight of appearances and family expectations." Andrew nodded, a sad smile forming on his lips. "My father lived divided between two worlds, fulfilling his duty toward the Harrison family, while his heart remained with Dorothy. I promised not to repeat his story." He took Emily's hands in his. "When I first saw you, I knew I had to find the courage he lacked. That's why I insisted on our marriage, even though it wasn't the most advantageous alliance by my mother's standards." "And what will happen when Martha discovers that you regularly visit Mama Dorothy?" asked Emily, aware of the tensions that already existed in the house. "The time has come for secrets to stop controlling our lives," Andrew responded with a determination that illuminated his features. "But I'll need your support, Emily. What I'm contemplating could forever change our position in this society." Emily felt the weight of the decision that approached. It wasn't just about publicly acknowledging Mama Dorothy. It was about challenging all the structures that had defined life in the county for generations. "Are you willing to risk your inheritance, your position for this?" she asked, needing to understand the magnitude of what Andrew was proposing. "I'm willing to fight for a future where our children, if we have them someday, don't live divided between who they are and who they're supposed to be," he responded, his voice firm but gentle. "The question, Emily, is whether you're willing to walk that path with me." The answer she would give would mark a turning point in their lives, a moment of conscious choice that would transform not just their marriage, but the very destiny of Oakwood Manor. "I'm with you," Emily responded with a certainty that arose from some deep place within her. "If we're going to build a life together, let it be one based on truth, not appearances." The decision was made, but the path that stretched before them was full of invisible obstacles and unpredictable consequences. Andrew and Emily knew that challenging established structures would require not only courage, but also strategy. The following days passed in a tense calm, like the still air that precedes a storm. Emily began to involve herself more actively in the administration of the plantation, learning the intricacies of the cotton business. Her natural intelligence and determination surprised the overseers, accustomed to plantation owners' wives, remaining in the domestic sphere. "A woman shouldn't concern herself with field matters," Martha commented one afternoon, as she observed Emily reviewing the accounting books with Andrew. "Your place is in organizing the house, not in business." "Times are changing, Mother," Andrew responded with gentleness but firmness. "Emily has a brilliant mind for numbers. It would be a waste not to take advantage of her talent." The tension between mother and son grew day by day, fueled by each small deviation from the traditions that Martha considered sacred. The breaking point came during a dinner with the most important families of the region, organized to celebrate the anniversary of Oakwood Manor's founding. The table gleamed with the best silver and crystal. Conversations flowed like the imported wine, centered on politics, cotton prices, and the inevitable social gossip. It was then that Andrew, after exchanging a glance with Emily, stood to make an announcement. "I'd like to take advantage of this special occasion to share important news," he began, his voice clear in the sudden silence. "We've decided to open a school for our workers' children on the plantation." The murmurs didn't take long to start. Martha set down her glass with a sharp tap on the table. "A school? For field hands' children?" Her tone distilled disbelief. "That will only give them ideas above their station." "I believe education is a right, not a privilege," Emily intervened, feeling it was the moment to show her unity with Andrew. "And as a future mother, I hope that my children grow up in an environment where everyone has opportunities." The words "future mother" created a new wave of murmurs. It wasn't an official announcement of pregnancy, but the insinuation was enough to momentarily distract attention from the main topic. "Emily is right," Andrew continued, "and there's something else I want to announce tonight. We've decided to name the school in honor of someone who has been fundamental in my upbringing, though her contribution has never been officially recognized: Dorothy Jenkins." The silence that followed was deafening. Martha visibly paled, while the guests exchanged glances of confusion or understanding, depending on how much they knew of the old rumors. "Dorothy wasn't just my nanny," Andrew continued, his voice firm despite the palpable tension. "She was my father's first love and an essential part of our family. It's time to honor her place in Oakwood Manor's history." The scandal that followed was exactly what they had anticipated. Martha abruptly withdrew from the table, followed by some of the more conservative ladies. The men remained, divided between discomfort and barely disguised curiosity. When the last guests departed, the inevitable confrontation took place in the study. Martha, recovered from her initial shock, confronted her son with a cold fury more intimidating than any emotional outburst. "You have dishonored the Harrison name tonight," she declared. "Your father must be turning in his grave." "My father lived a divided life because he didn't have the courage to face these same conventions," Andrew responded. "I won't make his mistake." "And you?" Martha directed her glacial gaze toward Emily. "I suppose this madness has been partly your doing. I always knew you were too independent to be a good Harrison wife." "With all due respect, ma'am," Emily responded, maintaining her composure, "I believe being a good wife means supporting my husband in what is right, not in what is merely convenient or traditional." The matriarch straightened her back, her small figure suddenly imposing in her offended dignity. "Very well. If you're determined to follow this path, you must assume all its consequences." Her voice was cutting like the edge of a knife. "From this moment, I withdraw my support for any initiative you undertake. The society of the county will know that these decisions are solely yours, not those of the Harrison family as a whole." With those words, Martha left the study, leaving behind the echo of a rupture that seemed irreparable. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Emily found Andrew contemplating his father's portrait that hung above the fireplace. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly, embracing him from behind. Andrew covered her hands with his gaze still fixed on the painted eyes that seemed to observe him with a mixture of pride and reproach. "I only regret not having done it sooner," he responded. "But the path we've chosen won't be easy, Emily. My mother has influence, and the traditional families will close ranks around her. Then we'll find allies in other places," said Emily with the determination he had admired from the beginning. "There are young plantation owners with progressive ideas, merchants in the city who value innovation, and we have the workers, whose loyalty we'll earn with actions, not with names." Andrew turned to look at her, his face illuminated by a new resolution. "Tomorrow we'll visit Mama Dorothy together," he said. "It's time for you to meet her officially, not from the shadows, and we'll begin planning the school immediately." That night, as the moon bathed the cotton fields with its silver light, two intertwined souls understood that they had crossed a threshold. The marriage that had begun as an arrangement was now transforming into an alliance forged in the fire of shared decisions and common values. Oakwood Manor was about to enter a new era, and although the future was uncertain, Emily and Andrew would face it together, with the certainty that some battles, however difficult, deserved to be fought. The stormy season arrived with a fury that seemed to reflect the social storm unleashed in the county, after Andrew's announcement. The dirt roads turned to muddy bogs, making cotton transport difficult. The dark clouds that discharged mercilessly on the fields seemed to have also settled over Oakwood Manor's big house, where Martha's silence weighed more than any verbal reprimand. The matriarch had fulfilled her threat. In the weeks following the announcement, several influential families cancelled business agreements with the plantation. The bankers in Atlanta suddenly appeared reluctant to grant the credits that traditionally financed the expansion of the crops. Emily observed how Andrew faced each new obstacle with serene determination, though she could perceive the emotional cost of his estrangement from his mother and the rejection from circles that had been his world since childhood. One particularly stormy morning, as they reviewed the accounts in the study, Emily noticed they would lack funds to complete the harvest if things continued this way. "Perhaps we should postpone building the school," she suggested pragmatically, "just until the financial situation stabilizes." Andrew looked up from the account book, surprised. "Are you having doubts?" he asked, his voice laden with concern. Emily firmly shook her head. "About our decisions, none. But we need to be strategic. If the plantation goes bankrupt, we can't help anyone." Andrew stood, approaching the window to contemplate the curtain of rain that blurred the landscape. "There is a solution, although I didn't want to resort to it," he finally said. "My grandfather left a trust in my name, independent of the family properties. My mother can't block it, but I've always avoided using it because—" He interrupted himself, and Emily completed the thought. "Because it was a way of keeping your independence in reserve, an escape plan if life as the Harrison heir became unbearable." Andrew turned, surprised by her perception. "How did you know?" "Because I would have done the same," she responded with an understanding smile. "We all need a corner that's just ours, even the heirs of great plantations." That afternoon, while the rain granted a brief truce, they decided to visit Mama Dorothy. The road was in worse condition than ever, but Andrew insisted it was important to see her. The old woman received them with her usual warmth, though Emily noticed she seemed more fragile than at their first meeting. Since the dinner where Andrew had made his announcement, Emily had regularly visited Dorothy, developing a genuine affection for the woman whose wisdom transcended her limited formal education. "You bring worries in your eyes," Dorothy commented as she served them freshly prepared herbal tea. "The problems with Martha are affecting the plantation, aren't they?" "Nothing we can't handle," Andrew responded, though his tone lacked conviction. Dorothy studied his face with the insight that only years can give. "There's something you should know," she finally said, rising with effort to approach an old trunk. "Robert asked me to give this to you if you ever decided to follow your own path, defying conventions as he never dared to do." From the depths of the trunk, she extracted a package wrapped in waxed cloth, protected from humidity and the passage of time. With gnarled hands, she placed it on the table in front of Andrew. "Your father wasn't just the Harrison heir," she explained as he carefully unwrapped the package. "Before returning to fulfill his family duty, he spent years traveling, learning, living a life that few knew about." The contents of the package left Andrew speechless. Travel journals, maps with annotations, legal documents, and, most surprisingly, deeds to properties in places as distant as California and New York. He invested in lands and businesses far from the county, where his name meant nothing and he could simply be Robert, Dorothy continued. "No one in the family knows about these properties. He kept them as his secret, his insurance for a future he never dared to claim." Emily observed the scene, understanding the magnitude of the revelation. This wasn't just about unexpected financial resources. It was the legacy of a man divided between duty and dreams, offering his son the freedom he himself never attained. "Why didn't you tell me before?" asked Andrew, his voice barely a whisper. Dorothy took his hand between hers, her eyes bright with contained tears. "Because it had to be your decision first, my boy. You had to choose your path by your own conviction, not by knowing there was a safety net waiting for you." That night, back at the plantation, Andrew and Emily stayed up late reviewing the documents. The properties were not only intact, but had been discreetly managed by trusted lawyers for years, generating income that had been constantly reinvested. "With this, we could not only build the school, but implement improvements throughout the plantation," said Emily, studying the figures. "Modernize cultivation methods, improve conditions for the workers, or we could leave it all behind," interrupted Andrew, his voice containing a new emotion. Start anew in one of these places, far from expectations and the weight of the Harrison name. Emily looked up, surprised by the suggestion. For a moment she contemplated the possibility. A life away from the complications of the county, a new beginning where they would simply be Andrew and Emily without the weight of generations dictating their actions. "Is that what you really want?" she finally asked. "To abandon Oakwood Manor?" Andrew remained silent, his gaze lost in the flames of the fireplace that cast dancing shadows on the study walls. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "Part of me yearns for that freedom. But another part knows that running away wouldn't change anything fundamental," Emily completed. "Oakwood isn't just land and cotton. It's the people who depend on the plantation. It's generations of history. It's my home," Andrew concluded with a melancholy smile. "With all its imperfections." Emily approached, taking his face in her hands. "Then we won't run away," she declared softly. "We'll use this legacy to transform Oakwood Manor into the place your father dreamed it could be. The place you've dreamed of. A home where no one has to divide their soul between duty and truth." Andrew drew her to him, in an embrace that contained all the gratitude that words couldn't express. In that moment, as the rain again lashed against the windows, both felt that something fundamental was sealed between them, a shared vision, a common purpose that transcended the initial arrangement of their marriage. What they didn't know was that the storm, both literal and metaphorical, was just beginning. The revelations of the past had opened doors that could no longer be closed, and the consequences would manifest in ways that neither could foresee. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. With the resources from Robert's Secret Trust, Andrew and Emily were able not only to keep the plantation functioning during the crisis, but also to begin construction of the school. The workers, initially cautious about the changes, began to show renewed enthusiasm when they saw the foundations of the building that would educate their children emerge. However, each step forward seemed to provoke new resistance. Martha, though silent in her disapproval, had become the center of a subtle but effective campaign against her son's innovations. Invitations to important social events stopped arriving. The traditional county families began to treat Oakwood Manor's products with barely disguised disdain in the markets. On a particularly difficult afternoon, after receiving news that the local pastor refused to bless the school once completed, Andrew returned to the plantation with an expression that Emily had learned to recognize, a mixture of frustration and determination that tensed the lines of his face. She found him in the painting studio, a place that had become their shared refuge. There, amid the aroma of oils and turpentine, concerns seemed to temporarily dilute. Andrew stood before a large canvas, applying energetic brushstrokes that contrasted with his usual meticulous precision. "Reverend Williams says he cannot support an initiative that undermines the natural order of things," he said without turning, perceiving Emily's presence. "Apparently educating field hands' children beyond the basics threatens the county's social stability." Emily approached, observing the painting in progress. It wasn't a landscape like those Andrew usually painted. This time, the canvas showed a scene from the town market, with figures from all social classes intermingled in daily activity. "It's beautiful," she commented, recognizing the intention behind the work. "Everyone together, each with their purpose, forming a harmonious whole." Andrew nodded, lowering his brush. "This is how I see the county's future, not as rigid strata that never touch, but as a community where each person can develop their potential." He turned to her, a blue paint smudge on his cheek accentuating the intensity of his gaze. "But sometimes I wonder if we're trying to change something too deeply rooted, Emily. If we're not simply wearing ourselves out against a wall that will never yield." It was the first time Andrew had expressed doubt so openly, and Emily understood the weight he carried on his shoulders. It wasn't just the external resistance, it was the internal struggle between the Harrison heir, educated to maintain centuries-old traditions, and the man who yearned for a more just world. "Even the oldest walls eventually fall," she responded, gently cleaning the paint smudge from his face. "But they don't fall all at once, they erode gradually, stone by stone." It was in this moment of shared vulnerability when an urgent knock on the door interrupted them. Ruth, the cook, appeared with a distraught face. "Mr. Andrew, it's Mama Dorothy," she said, her voice trembling. One of the boys just arrived from her house. She's very ill and asking for you." The path to Dorothy's house had never seemed so long. When they arrived, they found the old woman in bed, attended by a local woman known for her knowledge of medicinal herbs. Her breathing was labored, and an intense fever colored her normally pale cheeks. "My boy," she whispered upon seeing Andrew trying to sit up without succeeding, "I knew you would come." "Don't strain yourself, Mama Dorothy," he responded, kneeling beside the bed and taking her hand in his. "We're here. We'll take you to the main house where we can care for you better." A weak smile formed on the old woman's cracked lips. "No, son. My place is here, where I've lived my days." Her eyes, though clouded by fever, maintained a surprising lucidity. "But there's something I must tell you before it's too late." Emily approached with a damp cloth, refreshing Dorothy's burning forehead while exchanging a concerned look with the healer. The woman's expression left no room for doubt. The situation was serious. "Whatever it is can wait until you've recovered," Andrew insisted, his voice betraying the emotion he was trying to contain. Dorothy weakly shook her head. "I've kept too many secrets in my life, son. I don't want to take any more with me." She paused to catch her breath. "The trust that Robert left for you, it wasn't the only thing." With effort, she indicated to Emily to look under the pillow. There they found a gold locket with intricate engravings. When Andrew opened it, he discovered inside a miniature portrait of Dorothy in her youth, surprisingly similar to some of the paintings he kept in his secret studio. "He taught you to paint, didn't he?" Dorothy asked with a tired smile. "Robert always had that gift, seeing beauty where others only saw the ordinary." "But the tutor who came to the plantation," Andrew began, confused. "He was a front so Martha wouldn't suspect," the old woman explained. "Your father was who really guided your hand, who taught you to mix colors and capture light. Those afternoons you spent studying, you were actually with him in this very place, learning the art that his own family had forbidden him to practice openly." The revelation fell upon Andrew like an unexpected wave, altering the map of his memories. Images of his childhood rearranged themselves under this new light. His father's mysterious absences, the lessons that always seemed to occur when his mother was busy with social commitments, the inexplicable familiarity he felt with Dorothy from the first moment he officially met her. "There's more, son," Dorothy continued, her voice weakening. "Your father never had the courage to confront his family, to break with the expectations that weighed on him. That was his greatest regret. In his last days, he made me promise that I would help you be braver than he was, that I would support you when you found your own path, even if that meant defying everything the Harrisons represent." A silent tear rolled down Andrew's cheek. "Why did you never tell me before?" "Because each person must discover their truth at their own pace," Dorothy responded, her breathing increasingly labored. "Your father wanted you to be free to choose, not to feel obligated to compensate for his own incomplete choices." Emily, perceiving the intimacy of the moment, discreetly withdrew toward the door, but Dorothy's voice stopped her. "Stay, child," the old woman asked. "You are part of this now." The woman Andrew chose with his heart, not with his name. That night, keeping vigil by Dorothy's bedside, Andrew and Emily faced together the weight of family legacies, hidden truths, and the decisions that would define not only their future, but that of all those connected to Oakwood Manor. Dorothy's fever fluctuated, moments of lucidity alternating with periods of delirium where she called to Robert as if he were present. In her moments of clarity, she shared stories that completed the puzzle of the past. How she and Robert had planned to escape together in their youth. How his father's sudden death had precipitated his return to assume family responsibilities. How they had maintained their love in the shadows for decades. "The real failure," she whispered in a moment of particular lucidity, "is not facing the disapproval of others, but living betraying what you know is right. Don't make our mistake. Don't let fear of others' judgment dictate the path of your hearts." When dawn began to tinge the horizon with golden and pink hues, Dorothy seemed to momentarily regain strength. She asked for paper and pencil, and with a trembling hand wrote something she then gave to Andrew in a sealed envelope. "For your mother," she said, "when the time comes." The words hung between them, charged with a meaning that only time would reveal. The following days turned into a constant vigil by Dorothy's bedside. Against Andrew's initial wishes, they remained in the small cabin instead of moving her to the main house. Emily understood the wisdom in the old woman's request. This was her home, the only space where she had been able to be completely herself for decades. The news of Dorothy's illness spread quickly through the county. To Emily and Andrew's surprise, many plantation workers and townspeople began to appear with small offerings, medicinal herbs, prepared meals, wildflowers. It soon became clear that Mama Dorothy was much more than the Harrisons' former nanny. She was a beloved presence in the community, a counselor to whom many had turned in times of need. One afternoon, as Emily temporarily returned to the plantation to fetch clean clothes, she encountered Martha in the main hallway. The matriarch, always impeccable in her presentation, now showed subtle signs of tension, deeper lines around her eyes, a paleness that makeup couldn't completely disguise. "Andrew hasn't returned to the house in 3 days," she said, her tone a mixture of reproach and something that could be interpreted as concern. "The overseers need instructions for the harvest." "He's with Dorothy Jenkins," Emily responded, deciding to directly confront the situation. "Her condition is serious." A flash of something indefinable crossed Martha's face. "That woman has always exerted a disturbing influence over the Harrison men," she commented coldly. "First Robert, now my son." Emily felt something within her tense, like a rope about to break. The weeks of veiled hostility, of passive resistance to everything she and Andrew were trying to build, crystallized in that moment into a steely determination. "That woman, as you call her, has loved your family with a loyalty that transcends any social convention," she responded, maintaining a respectful but firm tone. "She has kept secrets that could have destroyed reputations, has accepted living in the shadows to protect the Harrison name, and now she's fighting for her life, while still worrying about Andrew's well-being." Martha seemed momentarily disconcerted by the direct response, so contrary to the deference she normally received. "You know nothing about our family," she finally said, recovering her composure. "You're a newcomer who presumes to judge situations you don't understand." "I understand love," Emily responded with simplicity, "and I understand that sometimes we cling so tightly to appearances that we forget what really matters." Without waiting for a response, she continued on her way to the bedroom. As she gathered what was needed, she noticed that her hands were trembling slightly. The confrontation with Martha had liberated something in her, a voice of her own that until then she had moderated out of respect for established hierarchies. When she returned to Dorothy's house, she found Andrew seated by the window, contemplating the sunset with a distant expression. The old woman slept, her breathing more regular than in previous days, which fed a cautious hope. "I spoke with your mother," said Emily, sitting across from him. "She's worried about the plantation." A humorless smile curved Andrew's lips. "The plantation has always been her true child," he responded, though without bitterness. "The Harrison legacy, the continuity of the name, the social position, all that was always more important than the people behind the name." "Do you think she'll ever understand?" asked Emily, taking his hands in hers. "That she'll see beyond conventions?" Andrew remained silent for a moment, his eyes returning to Dorothy's sleeping figure. "I don't know," he finally admitted. "But I've been thinking, Emily, about the future, about who I really want to be." Something in his tone alerted Emily. There was a new resolution, as if during those days of vigil he had reached a fundamental conclusion. "I've lived divided, like my father," he continued, "trying to please external expectations while hiding essential parts of myself. Painting, my friendship with the workers, even my relationship with Mama Dorothy, all relegated to secret spaces as if they were shameful." He rose, approaching the bed where Dorothy rested. "Seeing her like this, fighting for each breath, has made me realize how fragile everything is." His voice broke slightly. "I don't want to reach the end of my life with regrets similar to my father's, Emily. I don't want to look back and see an existence divided between appearances and truths." "What exactly are you deciding?" she asked, perceiving that a turning point was approaching. "If Mama Dorothy recovers, I want her to live in the main house, with the respect and position she always deserved," he declared, his voice firm despite the emotion. "And I want to transform Oakwood Manor into a place where no one has to hide who they really are, where a person's value doesn't depend on their name or position." Emily nodded, recognizing the magnitude of what he was proposing. It wasn't simply a challenge to social conventions, it was a complete redefinition of what it meant to be a Harrison, of what Oakwood Manor would represent in the future. "It will be a battle," she warned, though her tone made it clear she was willing to fight it by his side. "I know," Andrew responded, "but it's a battle that should have been fought long ago." That night, as they kept vigil together, Emily observed her husband briefly dozing in the chair beside Dorothy's bed. His face in repose showed a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to consciously reveal. She thought about the path traveled since that first wedding night, when a stranger had promised to take it slow, to this moment when they shared not just a life, but a vision of the future for which they were willing to sacrifice privileges and comforts. Dorothy's soft murmur drew her from her reflections. The old woman had awakened and was observing her with surprising clarity in her gaze. "He's changing," she whispered, so low that Emily had to lean in to hear her. "Andrew, he's finding his true strength. Thanks to you," Emily responded, adjusting the blankets around the fragile figure. Dorothy weakly shook her head. "Thanks to you, child. I only kept the seeds. You've created the fertile soil where they can grow." She paused to breathe. "Take care of him when I'm gone, not from the world but from himself, from the temptation to harden his heart in the face of the difficulties that will come." "I promise," Emily assured, feeling the weight of the oath. "And one more thing," Dorothy added, her voice barely audible. "The locket, open it completely, there's a secret compartment." Before Emily could ask more, Dorothy had sunk back into a restless sleep. Careful not to wake Andrew, she took the locket that rested on the nightstand and examined its structure. Indeed, upon pressing a hidden spring, a tiny compartment was revealed containing a folded paper. Unfolding it, she found an elegant but firm handwriting that she recognized as similar to Andrew's. "My Dorothy, my true north, when all paths seem lost. If you're reading this, I've finally found the courage I lacked in life. Watch over our son as you always have, with that wisdom that goes beyond books and names. And remind him that a man's true legacy isn't in the lands he owns, but in the love he has freely given. Eternally yours, Robert." Emily carefully refolded the paper and returned it to its hiding place. The words "our son" resonated in her mind, completing a puzzle that had been forming since her first conversations with Dorothy. Andrew wasn't simply the heir that Robert Harrison had favored with his affection. He was his biological son, born of the true but impossible love between him and Dorothy, presented to the world as the legitimate son of his marriage to Martha. This final secret, the deepest of all, explained so much. The special connection between Dorothy and Andrew, Martha's persistent coldness toward her own son, even Andrew's physical traits that didn't completely correspond with other members of the Harrison family. Emily understood that this knowledge was an enormous responsibility. Revealing it imprudently could destroy not only the Harrisons' reputation, but Andrew's very identity. However, concealing it would perpetuate the cycle of secrets and half-truths that had already poisoned too many lives. As she contemplated her sleeping husband's face, Emily made a decision. The truth would have to come to light, but at the right time and in the right way. For now, her duty was to support Andrew in the transformation he was experiencing and to honor the trust that Dorothy had placed in her. The night advanced slowly, shadows dancing on the walls of the small cabin, while three souls intertwined by destiny transited, each in their own way, through a valley of decisions that would forever change the course of their lives. Dawn brought with it a fierce storm, as if the sky itself wanted to participate in the drama unfolding beneath its canopy. Lightning intermittently illuminated the room where Dorothy struggled for each breath, her condition visibly deteriorating, despite the combined efforts of the town doctor, finally convinced to attend the former servant and the local women with their traditional remedies. Emily observed the growing desperation in Andrew's eyes as he held Dorothy's increasingly cold hand. The powerlessness in the face of the inevitable progression of the illness visibly consumed him, transforming the confident and decisive plantation owner into a terrified son facing the prospect of an irreparable loss. A particularly violent thunder shook the small cabin, and at that precise moment the door opened, revealing an unexpected figure. Martha, soaked by the rain, her usual impeccable appearance completely abandoned. Her face, normally a mask of aristocratic composure, showed a vulnerability that Emily had never seen. "Mother," the surprise in Andrew's voice was palpable. "What are you doing here?" The matriarch didn't immediately respond. Her gaze was fixed on Dorothy's prostrate figure, a complex emotion transforming her features. "I've come to see her," she finally said, her voice devoid of its usual authoritarian tone. Emily rose discreetly. "I'll give you a moment," she offered, heading toward the door. "No," Martha stopped her with a gesture. "Stay. You're part of this family now, for better or worse." Those words, though not precisely warm, represented the first real acknowledgement of her position that Emily had received from her mother-in-law. She exchanged a quick glance with Andrew, whose evident confusion reflected her own. Martha approached the bed, observing Dorothy with an intensity that seemed to contain decades of contained emotions. After a moment of hesitation, she took the sick woman's free hand in hers. "Dorothy," she said, her voice barely audible over the rumor of the rain. "I'm here." To everyone's amazement, Dorothy's eyes opened, focusing with unexpected clarity on Martha's face. "You've come," she murmured, a weak smile forming on her pale lips. "After so long." "Ruth showed me the letter," Martha responded, referring to something that neither Emily nor Andrew knew about. I couldn't let you go without—" Words seemed to fail her, a phenomenon so unusual in the eloquent matriarch that it was almost as shocking as her very presence in that cabin. "Without making peace," Dorothy completed, slightly squeezing Martha's hand. "I know. You were always proud but never cruel." Andrew observed the exchange with growing bewilderment. "What are you talking about?" he finally intervened. "What letter?" The two older women exchanged a meaning-laden look. "The letter I wrote to your mother 3 days ago," Dorothy explained, her voice weakening with each word. "When I knew my time was growing short. I asked Ruth to deliver it personally," she added, addressing Andrew. "There are things that can only be said when facing death head-on." Martha straightened, recovering some of her usual composure. "Dorothy reminded me of a truth I've tried to deny for too long," she said, each word clearly an effort. "That true love is more valuable than any appearance, than any tradition." Lightning illuminated the room, revealing unshed tears in Martha's normally severe eyes. "Your father loved this woman, Andrew," she continued, her voice firm despite the emotion. "He loved her all his life, even while fulfilling his duty as my husband. I knew it, I always knew, though I pretended to ignore it to maintain intact the facade of the perfect marriage." Andrew seemed unable to process what he was hearing. This version of his mother, capable of acknowledging such painful truths, was completely alien to the image of inflexibility he had known all his life. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked, confusion giving way to a mixture of pain and resentment. "Why after years of silence and denial?" "Because Dorothy asked me to in her letter," Martha responded, again directing her gaze toward the sick woman. "She asked me to allow you to be free in a way that neither Robert nor I could be, not to let the weight of appearances destroy another generation of Harrisons." A charged silence followed her words, broken only by the persistent drumming of rain on the roof. Emily observed the scene with the sensation of witnessing the denouement of a story that had begun long before her arrival in the county. "There's something else you should know," Martha continued, addressing her son directly. "Something I've kept hidden even from you, Dorothy." The old woman looked at her with surprise as Martha extracted from her pocket a carefully folded yellowed paper. "Robert wrote this the night before his death," she explained. "I found it among his belongings and should have destroyed it according to all social conventions. But I couldn't do it." With slightly trembling hands, she unfolded the paper and began to read. "My dear Martha, at the end of this path we've traveled together, I owe you the truth that I never had the courage to pronounce in life. Our marriage was a family arrangement, but over the years I developed for you a deep respect and affection. However, my heart always belonged to Dorothy. This secret has been my burden and my shame, not for loving her, but for lacking the courage to honor that love openly. I ask your forgiveness for the divided life I offered you. You deserved a man whose heart belonged to you completely, and I thank you for giving me the greatest gift, loving and raising as your own the son that Dorothy and I conceived. Yes, Martha, Andrew is the fruit of our forbidden love, brought into the world in secret and presented as a legitimate heir, thanks to your silent complicity. In these last moments, I can only hope that someday you'll find in your heart the capacity to free our son from the chains that the three of us forged for him, to allow him to live with the authenticity that we sacrificed on the altar of appearances. With eternal gratitude and respect, Robert." The room was plunged into absolute silence when Martha finished reading. Andrew seemed petrified, his face a mask of shock and bewilderment. Emily, though she already knew part of the truth thanks to the hidden message in the locket, felt the impact of its public confirmation and the astonishing acknowledgement that Martha had always known the truth. "You knew?" Andrew's voice when he finally spoke was barely a hoarse whisper. "You always knew I wasn't really your son?" Martha raised her chin, a characteristic gesture that now seemed more defensive than haughty. "I knew from the beginning," she confirmed. "Robert returned from one of his mysterious business trips with the news that I was pregnant. I couldn't have children, something only the two of us knew. It was his way of giving me the heir the family expected, while finding a way to keep Dorothy in our lives. And you accepted that? That farce?" Incredulity tinged every word of Andrew's. "It was a different time, son," Dorothy intervened, her voice surprisingly firm despite her physical weakness. "Women like Martha and me had limited options. She chose to preserve her position and the Harrison name. I chose to remain close to the man I loved and the son I couldn't publicly claim. And I chose the security of conventions over the uncertainty of change," Martha completed, an evident bitterness in her tone. "It wasn't noble, but it was human." Emily observed Andrew, fearing his reaction to such fundamental revelations. Everything he believed about his identity, about his place in the world, had just been questioned. However, to her surprise, a strange calm seemed to descend upon him as he processed the information. "So my entire life has been built on lies," he finally said, his voice controlled but charged with emotion. "My name, my inheritance, my place in this society, all based on an elaborate fiction." "Not everything, son," Dorothy responded, extending a trembling hand toward him. "The love that the three of us felt for you, each in our own way, was always real. Your talent, your goodness, your ability to see beyond appearances, that has nothing to do with names or social positions." A new silence fell over the room as the storm outside began to abate, as if nature itself recognized the importance of the moment unfolding beneath its canopy. Finally, it was Emily who spoke, her voice soft but firm. "What matters now is not the past we cannot change, but the future we decide to build with these truths," she said, approaching Andrew and taking his hand. "Your origin doesn't determine who you are or who you can become." Andrew looked at her, something changing in his eyes as he assimilated her words. Then, in a gesture that surprised everyone, he knelt between the two older women, taking a hand of each. "All my life I've felt that I belong to two worlds," he said, his voice gradually recovering its firmness. "Now I understand why. I'm no less a Harrison for being Dorothy's son, nor less Dorothy's son for bearing the Harrison name. I am the bridge between two worlds that should never have been separated." In that moment, as the first light of dawn began to timidly filter through the retreating clouds, something fundamental seemed to seal itself among the four present. A silent pact of truth, a commitment to a future different from the past they had just confronted. What none could foresee was how this newly unearthed truth would alter the course not only of their personal lives, but of the entire county. The days following the revelations passed in a strange calm, like the silence that follows an earthquake, when the world tries to regain its balance. Dorothy's condition, surprisingly, began to improve, as if the release of long-held secrets had also eased the burden on her body. The fever gradually subsided, and her strength began to return. The dynamic among Oakwood Manor's inhabitants had fundamentally changed. Martha, though maintaining much of her usual formality, showed a new, more reflective facet. In a gesture that astonished the entire plantation, she ordered the old guest room in the east wing prepared for Dorothy, while she fully recovers. Emily observed these changes with a mixture of hope and caution. Social and personal structures built over decades didn't transform overnight, and she knew that the path toward true reconciliation would be long and complex. One morning, while helping Dorothy settle into her new room in the big house, the old woman took her hand with surprising strength. "It won't be easy for Martha," she said, her insight intact despite her physical weakness. "She's lived her entire adult life, defined by her role as Mrs. Harrison. Publicly accepting my presence here challenges every rule she's religiously followed." "Do you think she's really changing?" asked Emily, arranging the pillows so Dorothy would be more comfortable. "Or is it just a temporary concession because of your illness?" A wise smile curved the old woman's lips. The human heart is more complex than any of our categories, child. Martha has always been more than the rigid figure she presents to the world. I believe she's discovering parts of herself that she kept sealed for too long. Dorothy's wisdom was confirmed that same afternoon when Emily found Martha in the garden, contemplating the rose bushes that had been her pride for decades. To her surprise, the matriarch wasn't wearing her usual formal dress but a simple skirt and blouse ensemble, and her hair, normally gathered in an impeccable bun, fell in a simple braid over her shoulder. "My mother loved these roses," Martha said without preamble when she sensed Emily's presence. "She brought them from England when she married my father. She always told me that a Harrison lady should be like these flowers, beautiful, but with enough thorns to protect her dignity." Emily approached cautiously, unsure of the emotional terrain she was treading. "They are truly beautiful," she commented. "They have an elegance not found in more exuberant flowers." Martha nodded, a flash of appreciation in her eyes for the observation. "For years I measured my worth by my ability to maintain appearances, to preserve the Harrison legacy exactly as I had received it," she continued, her voice acquiring an unusual reflective tone. "Now I wonder if that wasn't the greatest failure of all." "I don't think preserving traditions is a failure," Emily responded carefully. "It only becomes one when the cost is the truth and happiness of those we love." Martha looked at her directly, evaluating her with new eyes. "You're wiser than I expected when Andrew brought you here," she finally said. "I thought he only saw beauty and novelty in you, not inner strength." The compliment, as unexpected as it was sincere, momentarily left Emily without words. "Construction of the school will continue," Martha declared, abruptly changing the subject. "And I've been thinking that perhaps we could expand the project to include a small hospital for the workers and their families. The town doctor is competent, but overloaded." Emily contained her amazement at this dramatic turn, limiting herself to nodding naturally, as if the transformation of the inflexible matriarch into a social reformer was completely expected. "Andrew has excellent ideas about how to improve conditions for the workers," she commented. "I'm sure he'll appreciate your support." A shadow crossed Martha's face. "My son and I have much to rebuild," she admitted. "It won't be an easy road. Decades of emotional distance aren't repaired with a simple conversation or a change in policy." "But you've taken the first step," Emily pointed out, "and sometimes that's the hardest part." As they returned together toward the house, an unexpected spectacle captured their attention. In the main courtyard, Andrew had set up an easel and was painting openly, in view of all the workers passing by. Beside him, Dorothy, seated in a comfortable chair, observed his work with evident pride. Martha stopped, observing the scene with a complex expression. "He has Robert's talent," she murmured, more to herself than to Emily. "He always did, since childhood. I tried to discourage it, fearing it would distract him from his responsibilities as heir." "Perhaps art and responsibility aren't mutually exclusive," Emily suggested. "Maybe seeing the world through an artist's eyes gives him a unique perspective on how to manage the land and care for those who depend on it." Martha didn't respond directly, but the slight nod indicated she was considering the idea. Together, they approached the improvised open-air studio. The canvas showed a scene of the plantation from an unusual perspective, not the majestic main house that traditionally symbolized the Harrisons' power, but the humble workers' dwellings at sunset, transformed into something beautiful and dignified by the quality of light and the honesty of representation. "It's extraordinary," Martha commented, genuinely impressed. "It captures something essential that I had never noticed." Andrew, surprised by the unexpected compliment, exchanged a quick glance with Dorothy before responding. "I'm trying to paint the plantation as it truly is, not just its most presentable aspects." "Perhaps that's what we should all do more often," Martha responded, in an uncharacteristic moment of vulnerability. "See the complete reality, not just the parts that are comfortable for us." That exchange, though brief, marked the beginning of a gradual thaw between mother and son. It wasn't full reconciliation, but the mutual recognition of the possibility of a new type of relationship, built on shared truths instead of rigid expectations. That night, as Emily and Andrew walked under the stars, he shared something he had been considering for days. "I've decided to sign my paintings with both names," he said, his voice mixing resolution and vulnerability. "Harrison Jenkins. It's who I really am, the son of two worlds, of two different but equally valid loves. Emily squeezed his hand, understanding the magnitude of this seemingly simple decision. "It's a brave act," she responded, "and an honest one. There's more," he continued, stopping to look at her directly. "I want the school to be just the beginning. I have plans to transform Oakwood Manor into a different model of plantation, where success isn't measured only by productivity or profits, but by the well-being of all who make it possible." The passion in his voice was contagious, and Emily found herself imagining the possibilities alongside him. A plantation where workers had participation in decisions and benefits, where education and health were rights and not privileges, where art and beauty were valued as much as efficiency. "It will be a long road," she warned, always practical even in her most idealistic moments. "The other families in the county will resist, fearful that your ideas might spread to their properties." "I know," Andrew nodded. "That's why we need to be strategic, to demonstrate that this approach isn't just more just, but also more sustainable in the long term." Under the starry canopy, they elaborated plans and dreamed possibilities, their marriage definitively transforming from a convenient arrangement into an alliance of minds and hearts with a shared purpose. What they couldn't foresee was that their ideas would find both fierce resistance and unexpected support in the most improbable places, and that the entire county was about to experience changes that would widely transcend the boundaries of Oakwood Manor. The news spread through the county like fire in a dry canebrake. Andrew Harrison, now publicly signing as Harrison Jenkins, was implementing revolutionary changes at Oakwood Manor. The School for Workers' Children was no longer just a project, but a reality with brick walls and a red tile roof that proudly stood near the main house. The small hospital was under construction, and rumors about a profit-sharing system for workers generated both hope and unease among other landowning families. The first months were extremely difficult. As Emily had anticipated, many doors closed to the Harrisons. Invitations that once regularly arrived disappeared. Some traditional buyers of Oakwood cotton suddenly found non-existent quality issues to justify reducing their orders. However, for every door that closed, another unexpected one seemed to open. A young exporter from Atlanta, educated in New England and with progressive ideas, became particularly interested in the plantation's transformation story and offered better prices for its cotton, marketing it in international markets as an ethical product whose quality was enhanced by the fair conditions of its workers. One Sunday morning, as the family returned from church service in town, now with Dorothy proudly seated next to Martha in the carriage, to the persistent scandal of some ladies, they found a surprise waiting for them at the plantation entrance. A line of carts and horses belonging to workers from neighboring properties. "What's happening?" Andrew asked the foreman who came to receive them. "They've come to talk to you, Mr. Harrison," the man responded, visibly nervous. "They say they want to know more about the changes at Oakwood Manor. I told them to wait, that I didn't know if you would have time." "Of course I have time," Andrew interrupted, quickly dismounting. "Have them come to the main courtyard. Emily, could you ask for food and drink to be prepared for them? They've come from far away." The improvised meeting extended for hours. Men and women weathered by the sun and hard work listened attentively as Andrew explained the implemented changes. Fair wages, reasonable hours, access to education and medical care, small plots assigned to each family for their own crops, and the promise of a percentage of profits at the end of each successful season. "It's not charity," Andrew emphasized. "It's recognizing that Oakwood Manor's prosperity depends on the well-being of those who work its land. It's good for everyone, not just morally, but also economically." Emily, observing from the side, noticed Martha's silent but attentive presence at a second-floor window. The matriarch didn't directly participate in these meetings, but neither did she obstruct them as she would have months ago. Her transformation continued to be gradual but constant, manifesting in small gestures, like personally ensuring that the kitchen prepared enough food for all the visitors, or suggesting practical improvements for the school based on her own knowledge of administration. That night, after the last visitor had departed, Andrew found Emily in their bedroom, contemplating something with a thoughtful expression. "What's wrong?" he asked, approaching to discover that she was observing a small half-knitted baby garment. Emily looked up, a mixture of nervousness and joy illuminating her face. "I think it's time I learned to knit," she said, taking his hand to place it gently on her belly. We'll have a small visitor in a few months." The revelation transformed Andrew's face. The initial surprise quickly gave way to a joy so deep and genuine that Emily felt her heart might burst with happiness. In an impulse, he lifted her in his arms and spun with her around the room, both laughing like children. "Careful," she exclaimed between laughs. "We're two now." Andrew gently placed her on the bed, kneeling before her with an expression that combined awe and devotion. "A child," he murmured, again caressing her still flat belly. "Our child." "Or daughter," Emily added with a smile. "Or daughter," he conceded, his smile reflecting hers. "A Harrison Jenkins, who will be born into a world different from the one we knew. A world where they won't have to choose between who they are and who they're supposed to be." The news of the pregnancy spread quickly through the plantation, generating a wave of spontaneous celebrations. Dorothy cried with joy, her wrinkled hands already planning blankets and baskets for her first official grandchild. Even Martha showed uncharacteristic emotion, discreetly offering Emily access to the Harrison family cradle, carved in mahogany and passed down through generations. However, not everything was celebrations. Oakwood Manor's growing influence and its progressive ideas had begun to generate organized opposition among the county's more traditionalist families. Led by the Thompsons, former allies turned adversaries, they formed a coalition determined to counter what they considered a threat to their way of life. One afternoon, while supervising the final phase of the hospital's construction, Andrew received an unexpected visit. Ernest Thompson, patriarch of the family and former friend of his father. "Andrew," the older man greeted, deliberately obviating the Jenkins surname he now used. "We need to talk." Alone in the study, Thompson wasted no time on circumlocutions. "What you're doing is dangerous, boy," he said, rejecting with a gesture the offer of coffee. "Not just for you, but for the entire county. These ideas about equality and worker participation, they're altering a balance that has worked for generations. A balance that benefited a few at the expense of many," Andrew responded calmly. "Times are changing, Mr. Thompson. Either we change with them, or we'll be dragged against our will." The old man frowned, his narrowed eyes evaluating the man who had once been considered an ideal match for his own daughter. "We've already lost 2 important contracts because of you," he accused. "Workers who before were content with what they had now demand conditions like at Oakwood Manor. You're sowing seeds of revolution, and for what? To ease your conscience for being a servant's son." The veiled insult to Dorothy would have provoked a violent reaction from the Andrew of months ago. However, the man who now faced Thompson had grown beyond such provocations. "My conscience is at peace, Mr. Thompson," he responded with a calm that visibly unsettled the old man. "And I suggest you adapt to the new times. The model I propose isn't just more just, but also more profitable in the long term. Our workers are more productive because they feel part of something greater than themselves." "Youthful idealism," Thompson disdained. "You'll ruin yourself." "It's possible," Andrew conceded, "but at least I'll do it being true to my convictions, not clinging to privileges based on the exploitation of others." The visit ended with a barely veiled warning. The coalition of traditional families would do everything possible to stop the infection of new ideas before it spread beyond Oakwood Manor. That night, sharing the conversation with Emily, Andrew seemed concerned but not dejected. "They're organizing against us," he explained. "They'll pressure buyers, banks, even local authorities. It won't be easy." Emily, who had been reviewing the account books, looked up with an enigmatic smile. "Maybe we have more allies than you think," she said, showing him a newly arrived telegram. "Your exporter friend in Atlanta not only wants to increase his purchases, but has interested a European cooperative in our story. They want to visit Oakwood Manor and possibly establish an exclusive long-term contract." The news was a ray of hope, but both knew the battle was just beginning. The following months would be crucial, not just for the future of the plantation, but for the entire county. As Emily's belly grew, so did the tension in the region. The traditional coalition's tactics became more aggressive. Malicious rumors about Oakwood Manor's cotton quality, pressure on suppliers to increase their prices only for them, even attempts to bribe key workers to abandon the plantation. However, each obstacle seemed to strengthen the resolution of the peculiar family that now led Oakwood Manor. Andrew, Emily, Dorothy, and increasingly actively, Martha united forces, to face each new challenge with a combination of idealism and pragmatism that proved surprisingly effective. One afternoon, as Emily rested in the garden, she felt the first definite movements of the baby. Placing a hand on her rounded belly, she experienced a deep connection with the new life growing within her, a living symbol of the future they were fighting to create. Andrew found her thus, absorbed in silent communion with her unborn child. Seeing her expression, he sat beside her without speaking, simply taking her hand and sharing the sacred moment. "He's moving," Emily finally whispered, guiding his hand to the exact spot. "I think he'll be a revolutionary like his father." Andrew smiled, but his eyes reflected a more complex emotion than simple joy. "Sometimes I wonder if we're doing the right thing," he confessed quietly, "bringing a child into a world of conflict that we ourselves have helped create." Emily studied his face, understanding his fears. "All great changes generate resistance," she responded gently. "But our child will be born in a home where truth is valued above appearances, where love transcends social conventions. That in itself is an incalculable gift." Andrew nodded slowly, something resolving in his gaze. "You're right," he finally said. "And we have to ensure that the world we imagine isn't just a dream, but a reality he can inherit." That evening, as they contemplated the horizon together from the house's porch, something seemed to seal itself between them, an unspoken but deeply felt promise that the fruits of their struggle, both the child growing in Emily's womb and the transformation they had initiated in the county, would be nourished with all the love and determination they were capable of. What they didn't know was that fate had prepared a final test, a challenge that would test not only their convictions, but the very foundations of the new identity they had forged together. The calendar marked the end of the stormy season, when the confrontation that had been brewing for months finally erupted. The coalition of traditional families, led by the Thompsons, had moved from passive resistance to increasingly direct actions. The breaking point came when the regional bank, pressured by the large landowners, announced the immediate cancellation of all credits granted to Oakwood Manor, demanding full payment of outstanding debts within an impossible deadline of 30 days. The news hit the family like lightning in a clear sky. Although the plantation's finances had improved thanks to the new international contracts, immediate liquidity was insufficient to cover the entirety of the debt. Without those funds, the main harvest was in danger, along with workers' wages and the hospital's completion. Andrew received the official notification on a clear-skied morning that cruelly contrasted with the storm raging within him. Emily found him in the study, surrounded by account books and financial documents, his face a mask of tense concentration. "It's worse than I imagined," he said without preamble when she entered. "They've coordinated the attack perfectly. Not just the bank. The input suppliers have also cancelled our usual credit, and 3 local buyers have simultaneously withdrawn their orders." Emily, now in her 7th month of pregnancy, moved with the serene dignity of one carrying new life. She sat across from him, studying the numbers with the analytical sharpness that perfectly complemented her husband's passionate idealism. "They want to force us to sell," she concluded after a quick analysis, "or at least to abandon the reforms to regain financial support." Andrew nodded, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of contained frustration. "Mr. Thompson came this morning with a friendly offer." The sarcasm in his voice was evident. "The Thompsons are willing to buy Oakwood Manor for a fair price, considering the current difficulties. He also suggested, with feigned concern for your condition, that perhaps we should consider moving to the city, where we would find a less stressful environment to raise our child." Indignation flashed in Emily's eyes, but her response was interrupted by Martha's unexpected arrival. The matriarch, who had been surprisingly absent during the recent critical days, entered with a determined step, followed by Dorothy, whose expression reflected an unusual determination. "I've heard enough through that door," Martha declared without apologizing for her indiscretion, "and it's time for me to intervene." Andrew and Emily exchanged looks of surprise. Despite her recent evolution, Martha rarely actively participated in the plantation's administrative decisions. "Mother, I appreciate your concern, but—" Andrew began. "But nothing," she interrupted with a tone that recalled the old Martha, imperious and determined. "The Thompsons and their allies believe they can defeat us using the old rules of the game. It's time to show them that the Harrisons also know how to play that game when necessary." From her pocket, she extracted a set of carefully folded documents. "The deeds to the house I own in Charleston, inherited from my family," she explained, placing them on the desk. "It's worth more than enough to cover the immediate debts and give us time to reorganize our finances." The gesture left Andrew momentarily speechless. That house represented Martha's only truly personal property, independent of the Harrison patrimony, her refuge and symbol of autonomy for decades. "Mother, I can't accept that you sacrifice—" "It's not a sacrifice," she interrupted again. "It's an investment in the future you're building, a future that, I must admit, I'm beginning to value more than I would have thought possible." Before Andrew could respond, Dorothy stepped forward, her small figure radiating a serene dignity. "I also have something to offer," she said, extending a small package wrapped in cloth. "Your father gave me these jewels over the years. I've kept them, not for their material value, but for what they represented. But I believe now they can serve a greater purpose." Upon unwrapping the package, they discovered several antique pieces of considerable value: brooches, rings, and an emerald necklace that, Dorothy explained, had belonged to Robert's grandmother. "They were always rightfully yours, son," she added softly. "I was just keeping them until they were truly needed." Emily observed the scene with growing amazement, moved by the joint gesture of the two women who, from such different positions, had loved the same man and were now joining forces to protect their shared legacy. "With this, we gain time," she finally said, her practical mind evaluating the new possibilities. "But the coalition will continue pressuring in other ways. We need a broader strategy." It was then that Martha revealed the second part of her plan, demonstrating that her apparent absence in the previous days had actually been a period of intense activity. "I've been in contact with old friends in Charleston," she explained. "Influential people who have owed favors to the Harrison family for generations. The National Director of the Agricultural Bank will be here tomorrow, interested in personally learning about Oakwood Manor's innovative model to possibly replicate it in other regions. And I've invited a journalist from the Charleston Mercury to document our story." The revelation provoked a new wave of amazement. Martha, the strictest guardian of traditions, was using her elite connections to promote precisely the change she had initially so strongly resisted. "Why?" Andrew finally asked, expressing the question that hung in the air. "Why this change, Mother?" Martha approached the window, briefly contemplating the fields that stretched as far as the eye could see, before responding. "Because I finally understood what Robert was trying to tell me in his final letter," she said, her voice softer but no less determined. "That there's a difference between preserving what's valuable from the past and clinging to structures that only benefit a few at the expense of many. The Harrisons have always been leaders in this county, but perhaps we've been leading in the wrong direction." She turned to them, and for the first time Emily saw genuine emotion in her mother-in-law's usually controlled eyes. "And because that child," she continued, pointing toward Emily's belly, "deserves to be born into a better world than the one we created. A world where he doesn't have to choose between his name and his truth." The silence that followed was laden with meaning. A complete cycle seemed to close. The same woman who had maintained appearances at the cost of truth for decades now fought for a future where such sacrifices wouldn't be necessary. The following days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The Agricultural Bank director's visit proved extraordinarily productive. Impressed by Oakwood Manor's innovations and, undoubtedly, influenced by Martha's persuasion, he offered not only to refinance existing debts, but also a special credit line for projects that improved rural workers' conditions. The article in the Charleston Mercury, published a week later, presented Oakwood Manor as a revolutionary model of agricultural production that combined profitability with social responsibility. Andrew's personal story, publicly acknowledging his dual heritage as Harrison Jenkins, captured readers' imagination throughout the country, generating a national debate on rural social structures. The masterstroke, however, came from Emily. Using her analytical skills, she had discovered irregularities in the Thompson family's business practices, specifically in the purchase of land from small owners in difficulties. With this information, she drafted a proposal for an association of small farmers that, with Oakwood Manor's financial support, could gradually recover their properties while supplying quality cotton to the international contracts Andrew had secured. When the proposal became public, The traditional coalition's reaction was one of impotent fury. Their pressure tactics, effective in a closed system where they controlled all resources, crumbled in the face of the introduction of new actors and rules of the game. One afternoon, while together supervising the official inauguration of the school, now complete and full of enthusiastic children, Emily felt a sudden contraction that made her stumble. Andrew immediately supported her, alarmed by her expression of surprise and pain. "The baby?" he asked, though the answer was evident. "I think he's decided he doesn't want to miss the celebration," she responded, trying to smile despite the discomfort. What followed was organized frenzy. Martha took control of the situation with her characteristic efficiency, while Dorothy prepared traditional remedies to ease the pain. The town midwife, a woman of proven experience who had assisted generations of births, was immediately called. As they moved her to the main bedroom, now prepared for the birth, Emily experienced a strange mental clarity amid the physical pain. She observed the two older women working together with surprising coordination, Andrew moving between anxiety and determination to be an effective support. The workers organizing chains of messengers to keep everyone informed about the new mistress's condition. In that moment between increasingly intense contractions, she understood that what they had built was much more than administrative reforms or new social structures. They had created a true community where old divisions began to dissolve in favor of authentic human connections. "It's going to be all right," Dorothy whispered, refreshing her forehead with a damp cloth. "Your child will be born in love, surrounded by family, the true family you forged beyond blood and names." As the sun began to set, tinting with gold the county that stretched beyond the windows, Emily began the definitive labor, facing each contraction with the same determination with which she had faced each obstacle since her arrival at Oakwood Manor. Outside, the workers and their families had spontaneously gathered, maintaining a respectful but hopeful vigil. In the Thompson house, miles away, Ernest observed with bitterness the newspapers proclaiming the success of the Harrison experiment, aware that an era was ending in the county, regardless of his efforts to preserve it. And in Oakwood Manor's main bedroom, amid the transformative pain that precedes new life, Emily understood that her child would be born not at the end of a story, but at the exact point where many stories converged to give rise to something completely new, a future that they had helped create, but which would correspond to him and his generation to fully define. 5 years had passed since that night of storm and revelations. The county, like the family that had catalyzed its transformation, was no longer the same. Oakwood Manor had become a model studied and partially replicated in other regions of the country. The school, now expanded to include agricultural technical training for youth and adults, received frequent visitors interested in its innovative methodology. The hospital attended not only plantation workers, but the entire surrounding community, with a flexible payment system based on each family's economic capacity. But perhaps the most significant change was invisible to occasional visitors. A new form of relationship among all the county's inhabitants, where mutual respect gradually began to replace the old rigid hierarchies. At the heart of these changes, and of the narrative that accompanied them, was a small figure who now ran among the cotton fields, chasing butterflies with the absolute concentration that only children can maintain. "Matthew, don't go too far," Emily called from the porch, where she supervised the preparation of a special celebration. The boy, with his father's dark hair and his mother's expressive eyes, briefly stopped to wave before resuming his exploration of the world. At 4 years old, Matthew Robert Harrison Jenkins was the living embodiment of the integration his parents had fought to build, a child growing up knowing all parts of his heritage, without secrets or uncomfortable truths hidden behind respectable facades. Andrew emerged from the house carrying canvases and painting materials. The years had added some premature grey at his temples, but also a serenity that perfectly complemented his natural energy. His art, now recognized beyond the county, had become another way of narrating the ongoing transformation, capturing the dignity of agricultural work and the beauty of an evolving community. "Do you think she'll like it?" he asked, referring to the birthday gift he had prepared for Dorothy, a portrait that showed her not only as she was now, but also as she had been in her youth, the two images merging in a composition that captured the essence of a full life. "She'll love it," Emily assured, helping him position the easel perfectly under the central oak tree, now in its maximum splendor of bloom. Dorothy's 80th birthday celebration had gathered the entire community. The former nanny, now officially recognized as an integral part of the family, had become a sort of collective grandmother for the plantation's children, sharing stories and wisdom accumulated during decades of silent observation. Martha, who had perhaps experienced the most surprising transformation of all, emerged from the house with Matthew by the hand, having rescued him from some potentially dangerous adventure. Her relationship with the boy was particularly special. In him, she seemed to find a second chance to express the maternal affection she had repressed for so long. "This little one has his grandfather's adventurous spirit," she commented, handing the child to Emily. "And his mother's determination." The compliment, offered naturally, was a testimony to the path traveled. The old Martha would have considered the comparison with Robert an inappropriate mention, and the recognition of positive qualities in Emily an unnecessary concession. The celebration began at sunset, when the day's heat yielded to a pleasant breeze. The workers and their families gathered in the main courtyard, now redesigned as a communal space where the old divisions between the big house and the laborers' quarters intentionally blurred. Dorothy, seated in a chair of honor decorated with wildflowers, received everyone's affection with the simple grace that had always characterized her. Her health, though fragile, had notably stabilized since she occupied her legitimate place in the family and community. The culminating moment came when Andrew revealed the portrait, provoking exclamations of admiration and discreet tears in Dorothy's eyes. The image perfectly captured her duality, the vibrant young woman who had passionately loved and the wise old woman who had transformed suffering into compassion. "It's how I see myself in my dreams," she commented, lightly touching the canvas. "Young and old at once, all parts of my life gathered in a single moment." As the celebration continued with music and traditional dances, Emily found herself observing her extended family from a small distance. Andrew conversed animatedly with a group of workers about plans for the next harvest, his enthusiasm as contagious as ever. Martha and Dorothy, seated together under the main oak tree, shared some observation that provoked complicit smiles from both. And Matthew, the center of attention for a group of children, directed some complicated game, with the seriousness of a general planning a campaign. It was in that moment when she felt the first subtle sign, a barely perceptible movement that only she could detect. Placing a hand on her belly, just slightly rounded beneath the simple dress she had chosen for the occasion, she smiled at the secret she would soon share with Andrew. The family would grow again, continuing the cycle of renewal that seemed to define this new stage of their lives. As the sun definitively set behind the hills, tinting the sky with golden and pink hues, Andrew approached her, taking her hand in a gesture that had become their personal form of communication, a tactile language developed over years of deep companionship. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Emily considered sharing her news, but decided to save it for a more intimate moment. Instead, she expressed the thought that had been forming as she observed the celebration. "I'm thinking about that first night, when you told me you would take it slow," she responded, intertwining her fingers with his. "I didn't know then that you weren't just referring to that moment, but to a philosophy of life. That true love, true change, the transformations that really matter, all require patience, care, and the willingness to keep moving forward even when the path seems impossible." Andrew smiled, recognizing the truth in her words. "We've come a long way since then," he observed, his gaze encompassing not just the courtyard full of celebrants, but the entire plantation, and by extension the whole county. "And there's still much road ahead," she added, thinking of the future stretching before them, of the children who would grow up in this new world they were helping to create, of the challenges that would inevitably arise and require the same combination of idealism and pragmatism that had brought them this far. As the music increased in volume and couples began to dance in the center of the courtyard, Andrew took her by the waist, gently guiding her toward the improvised dance floor. "Do you remember the first time we danced?" he asked. "At that town party when everyone was watching us, expecting us to fail as a couple." Emily smiled, the memory vivid in her mind. "How could I forget? Martha watched my every step, and the Thompsons whispered behind their fans." She leaned back slightly to look into his eyes. "But you only looked at me, as if nothing else existed." Because nothing else did exist in that moment, Andrew confessed, gently turning her to the rhythm of the music. It was then that I knew with certainty I hadn't been wrong. That you were exactly the woman I had seen that first time in the market, haggling for jasmine seeds. As they moved among the other couples, Emily noticed something extraordinary. The dance floor had become a microcosm of the new order they had helped create. Foremen danced with neighboring landowners' daughters, young workers shared laughs with granddaughters of traditional families, and Martha herself accepted an invitation to dance from a former field hand who now supervised part of the production. The invisible boundaries that had divided the community for generations were blurring, not through decrees or impositions, but through genuine human connections facilitated by an environment where each person could be valued for their character and contribution, not for their name or position. "We've done it, haven't we?" Emily murmured, observing Matthew now dancing joyfully with Dorothy, carefully holding the old woman's wrinkled hands as she taught him the traditional steps. "At least we've begun something that has a life of its own." Andrew followed her gaze, his eyes bright with contained emotion. "We've planted seeds," he responded, "like your jasmine. Some have flowered quickly, others will take generations, but the garden has begun to grow." The celebration continued well into the night. When most of the guests had departed, leaving only the immediate family, Dorothy asked for a moment of attention. "Before this day ends, I want to share something with all of you," she said, her voice surprisingly firm despite her fatigue. "A gift that I've been secretly preparing." From a small bag, she extracted a package wrapped in hand-woven cotton cloth. She carefully unwrapped it to reveal a book bound in worn leather. "I began writing these memoirs when I learned that Robert had died," she explained. "At first, it was just a way to process my grief privately. Over the years, it became the story not just of an impossible love, but of the entire county, seen from the margins where I always lived." She passed the book to Andrew, whose hands trembled slightly upon receiving it. "It's for all of you, but especially for Matthew and his future siblings," Dorothy continued, "so they know not just the events but the hearts that beat behind them, the hopes, the fears, the dreams that shape the world they're inheriting." Emily, looking over Andrew's shoulder as he carefully opened the first page, saw a surprisingly elegant handwriting for someone who had received little formal education. The first lines immediately captured her attention. "True love doesn't always arrive at the opportune moment or in the expected form. Sometimes it appears as an impossible destiny, other times as a convenient arrangement that slowly reveals its deeper purpose. This is the story of how both types of love transformed not just individual hearts, but an entire county." "It's extraordinary," Andrew murmured, reverently turning the pages, "a chronicle from a perspective that has never been documented." Martha, who had remained unusually silent, approached to look at the book. "We should publish it," she said decisively, surprising everyone. "Not just for our family, but so others can learn from our story, from our mistakes, and eventually from our belated courage to correct them." Dorothy looked at her in amazement. "Publish it? But it would reveal so many secrets." "Secrets have done enough damage," Martha responded, with a firmness that recalled the matriarch she had been, but now with a completely different purpose. "It's time for our truths to serve a greater purpose than protecting appearances." That night, after putting an exhausted Matthew to bed and ensuring Dorothy rested comfortably, Emily and Andrew retired to their bedroom. The open window allowed the night breeze to bring the scent of jasmine that Emily had planted years ago, now grown in abundance around the house. "I have something to tell you," Emily announced as Andrew removed his jacket. "An additional birthday gift, though technically not for Dorothy." Andrew turned to her, intrigued. Emily took his hand and placed it gently on her belly. "Matthew will have a brother or sister by Christmas," she said simply. Andrew's expression transformed, passing from surprise to amazement, and finally to a joy so pure that Emily felt her heart might burst with happiness. Without words, he wrapped her in an embrace that communicated everything words couldn't express: gratitude, love, hope, and the shared certainty that this new beginning was part of something larger than themselves. Later, lying together in the darkness, illuminated by moonlight, Emily thought about the long and winding road that had brought them to this moment. From that wedding night where two strangers met in the twilight of imposed expectations, to this night where two soul companions contemplated a future they had helped forge with their own hands. "Do you know what's most extraordinary?" Andrew murmured, gently caressing her hair. That everything began with such a simple promise. I'll take it slow. I had no idea then how deep that journey would be, nor how it would transform not just our lives, but everything around us. Emily sat up slightly to look at him in the silvery penumbra. Perhaps that's the true lesson we've learned, she responded, that great transformations don't occur in dramatic explosions, but in small, deliberate steps. In daily decisions to choose truth over convenience, love over fear. The next morning, as the sun rose over the cotton fields that stretched like a green blanket toward the horizon, Emily found Andrew on the porch, contemplating the county with a serene expression. Matthew played nearby, building an imaginary world with stones and branches under Dorothy's watchful eye as she knitted in the shade. Martha emerged from the house with a tray of freshly made coffee, serving it herself instead of calling the service staff, as she would have done in the past. This simple gesture, unthinkable years ago, symbolized the profound evolution she had experienced. I've been thinking about what we discussed last night, she said, referring to the idea of publishing Dorothy's memoirs. I've written to a friend at the National Publishing House. He's interested not just in the manuscript, but in having it accompanied by reproductions of your paintings, Andrew, a visual and written testimony of our transformation. As they discussed the details of the project, Emily observed Matthew approach a small jasmine bush growing near the stairs. With surprising care for a child his age, he picked a fallen flower and ran to Dorothy to place it behind her ear, a gesture he had seen his father do with his mother countless times. In that simple act of tenderness, Emily saw the promise of the future they had built, a child growing free from the artificial divisions that had poisoned previous generations, capable of expressing affection without the restrictions of obsolete social conventions. The day advanced with the tranquil cadence that now characterized life at Oakwood Manor. In the distance, workers moved among the cotton fields, their voices occasionally carried by the breeze. The school hummed with children's laughter and songs. The small hospital attended patients who came even from neighboring plantations, the quality of its care transcending old rivalries. At sunset, when the sky was tinged with golden and crimson hues, the entire family spontaneously gathered in the back garden. Without prior planning, each had gravitated toward that shared space, as if some invisible force had summoned them to contemplate together the beauty of the ending day. Matthew scampered among the adults, inventing games that only he fully understood. Dorothy and Martha shared a quiet conversation about traditional recipes that both knew from different perspectives. Andrew, seated on the ground with his sketchbook, captured the scene with quick but precise strokes. Emily observed her family with a sense of fulfillment that transcended ordinary happiness. What she saw before her wasn't simply a group of people united by blood or marriage, but a microcosm of the world they had dreamed of, diverse but harmonious, respectful of tradition but not enslaved by it, valuing each individual for the totality of their being. Andrew rose to show her his sketch, a simple but powerful drawing that captured the essence of the moment. 5 figures of different ages and origins, united in a circle of genuine connection under the great oak tree that gave the manor its name. "This is what I always wanted to paint," he confessed quietly. "Not just landscapes or portraits, but moments that capture the soul of what truly matters." As the last ray of sun disappeared behind the hills, Matthew, tired from his explorations, curled up between Emily and Andrew. Martha and Dorothy, seated across from them, completed the intimate circle. "Tell me again how father and mother met," the boy asked with the characteristic insistence of small children who find comfort in repeated family stories. The 2 grandmothers exchanged a complicit look, silently deciding who would narrate this time the story that had become part of family mythology. "Your father saw your mother in the town market," Dorothy began, her voice acquiring the melodious tone of experienced storytellers. "She was haggling for jasmine seeds with such passion that it seemed the future of the world depended on getting exactly the right ones. And your father, who had always lived surrounded by people who hid their true feelings," Martha continued, naturally assuming her part in the shared narrative, "was fascinated by someone who showed such authenticity even in something as small as buying seeds." As the family story unfolded, jointly woven by voices that had once been divided by secrets and resentments, Emily felt a perfect circle closing. The jasmine seeds she had passionately haggled for years ago, unaware she was being observed by the man who would change her destiny, now literally bloomed around them, their sweet fragrance perfuming the night air. Taking Andrew's hand in hers, she understood that the true transformation they had achieved wasn't just external, in social structures or economic practices, but in each of their capacities to integrate all parts of themselves, past and present, strengths and vulnerabilities, certainties and doubts. And so, Andrew concluded, taking over the story for his sleepy son, we learned that true love isn't in a hurry. It grows day by day like the flowers mother plants, until it becomes something as natural and essential as breathing. As stars appeared one by one in the velvet sky, the family remained united in contemplative silence, each fully inhabiting the present moment, while honoring the past that had formed them and visualizing the future they would continue building together, step by step, with the patience of those who have learned that the deepest transformations are those that occur slowly, like whispers of the soul that gradually become a clear and resonant song. Hearts that learn to beat in harmony need not hurry. They have a lifetime to write together, the most beautiful story of all, one where each page is filled with the indelible ink of shared truth.